I figured I'd enter like I enter everywhere. I know to do that. Thank you. Oh, no. We'll put it right here. That's my garbage can from the dorms. Don't tell anyone. Welcome. I think we're starting. Everyone seems to be here. Hi, everyone. I know most of you in the audience. There's a few unfamiliar faces, maybe. No, there's like not very many. But I'll introduce myself anyways. I'm Corinne Yance, hailing from Winooski, Vermont. That's in the Burlington region. And before I dig into the whole slideshow thesis presentation thing, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to my amazing cohort that's here today. I really appreciate sharing this time with you, including the alumni who carried us into this program, weeping and crying and screaming and kicking. And also all of the great and incredible new people who have joined us since. I gotta make my notes bigger. My eyes can't read this. I also wanted to take a moment to thank our incredible faculty. It's kind of insane that this moment has come. I'm like, is this moment really here right now? But thank you to Fabienne, of course, who was the first person that kind of like pulled me into the program and kept me here. To Howard, who has started as our performative practice teacher and now is our thesis advisor, which I think is kind of funny because this does feel very performative, maybe a little bit extra performative because of Howard's instruction. Also, thank you to Jackie and Nadia. I just am so grateful that you guys joined the faculty team while I was still a student here. And of course, thank you to like all the teachers who have come and gone. So the ones that were kind of faculty, the visiting artists, there's just been a lot of teachers that have given us the knowledge and the support we needed. And then also, I want to say thank you, of course, to my family, which I include as my chosen family, I think is what we say. Just so many really busy days and like crisis calls and all of the like anxieties, all the times I couldn't do the things because I was absent-minded or doing too many things. The really mundane, dumb things of like watching TV and just living life. I'm really happy that and grateful that I have such a loving, supportive community, and definitely could not be here in so many ways without that. So I think that's worth noting. And then I just want to say, remember this image. I think some of you are familiar with this piece. I will be returning back to it. And this is just a picture from a show I did in 2021. This like mic is kind of directional, huh? I'm starting here with a problem. So preparing this thesis talk was incredibly difficult for me, surprise, surprise. But not like, the irony for me was that it was difficult to talk about the artwork, which of course is what I'm here to do. And that's because I have like my feet kind of in two spaces. So I am here as an art student in this moment, but I have the background as a housing advocate. So that's kind of like what I do back home. And I find myself wanting to talk about housing advocacy instead of the visual artwork that I came here to make. And there's a lot of overlap between the two, which it sounds weird and surprising, but you'll understand soon if you don't already, which I'm sure some of you do because I talk to you a lot. And then there's another layer that is really has made this, preparing this talk kind of difficult, and it's also important to note, is that talking about this work, which does, again, refer back to my work as a housing advocate and thinking about housing security, talking about this work is particularly difficult in Baltimore, and in particular at MICA. From the first summer that I came here, which wasn't my first summer at MFest, because of the pandemic, it was visible right away, this kind of like gaping disparity of resources between the folks that are inside the Lazarus building versus the folks outside. The other thing that's starkly evident to me, it's the impacts of redlining on Baltimore, which of course I know about. I'm sure most of you know about. Many US cities have very visible histories around redlining, but it was, it felt really block by block when I came here, and it was just something that felt kind of was heavy for me. And then so each summer I have left Vermont with this like blossoming and urgent housing crisis, and I've left that work. It often lands right as summer happens, because that's when the legislative session ends. And then I come here to be an art student and be in my art studio, which overlooks North Ave, including some community members that are maybe provisionally making homes right on the street. So there have been tents. Of course, there's folks that have been, washing windows to like get a couple bucks. And it just felt really clear, this like kind of disparity of resources. And this dichotomy really raises for me the question of my complicity in the inequity. So let me introduce my work on that note. Home threads together my art, my community projects, and my employment. I am an artist, a fair and affordable housing advocate, and a documentarian. I combine visual art with ethnographic media, which for me includes audio interviews, photographs, that household objects, or just objects kind of broadly, I said photographs, and the moving image, so video as well for you, Nadia. And then so my figurative paintings and installations really dig into the concept of home and housing from a community and personal perspective. My work is fairly grounded in Vermont. The landscape influences what I do, and of course it's integral to my work in other ways as well. And particularly the community, the work I do in the community and the urban and natural landscapes UEC will come through in my work. So in my final years of my studio art, visual art MFA is focused ironically on words. More broadly, I am reading, thinking, and talking about language. More specifically, I am talking about home, and that's what I'll be talking to you about today. Ooh, I should have started my timer. In talking about home, I am thinking about language and ideas. I'm talking and thinking about the way our ideas live on the inside and how we use language to kind of bring them to the outside. Similarly, home can be thought of as an interior where we all live, a space where we're maybe closer to ourselves before we present ourselves to the public, where we engage in the world of language. My work considers the intimacy of home spaces and the objects and people sharing that space. So this is a painting I did in 2021, one of the few rare oddities of the square canvas painting. And you can see that my dog Olive and my partner Ryan are depicted in it. You might not know that's Ryan, but now you do, who's here with us today. It is you. And so this is kind of a record of our dog Olive's first skunk. And it's really important for me to kind of acknowledge in my work this kind of personal lens. So you see a lot of my familial landscape showing up in my work. The compositions are created from a compiling of drawings, cell phone pictures, memories, other random visual references. But they're not, straight translations, right? They're kind of collaged. And then when I'm not here learning about art, my other hat, so to speak, my day job, my main income, whatever it is that we call this other thing that we do, is housing advocacy. So I work as a statewide housing advocate in Vermont, advocating for fair and affordable housing. And I've done that work since 2015, so it's a big part of my landscape there. And that is kind of complicated work. Housing advocacy, it can look like a lot of different things. It can be a lot of different kinds of experiences, and people have different assumptions about what that is or is not, and I'll be getting more into that shortly. But housing advocacy is not just the way I pay the bills. It's really important to me. It's a topic I care deeply about, both from my personal and familial experiences, and the way I witness how our housing or lack thereof impacts who can live in our community and where they can live. I think that there's a video here, and I remember that the audio is gonna be loud, because I practiced this.
Hi.
Oh, oops.
I think this
On
is
low,
one you
good
can
for me.
keep.
I arrived at this juncture of housing advocacy and my art practice in a very wandering, arduous, somewhat abrupt way. Despite always dreaming of my future as a maker, which I'm sure most of you here can relate to, so much so that in high school I researched all these art programs. I think I was just talking to someone about this. None of which when I was in high school, I think is what I said. When I was in high school, I researched all these art programs, and I didn't apply to any of them. Not getting into that. But even so, when I applied to grad school, it was with great reservation. I was kind of advised by a lot of the people I looked up to that were kind of leading me through the art experience to take risks and, make a big change in my life, move somewhere new, leave my community, leave my home, leave my neighborhood behind, and, a little bit like talk down to don't be scared. You gotta make big risks for big life experiences. And it was devastating to me. It was like, I'm allowed to swear because there's only us here. I was like, what the fuck? Like, I have to leave this to have the thing that I always wanted. It felt like not fair. And I was also like, I think I'm pretty brave, but I still don't want to share a building with 10 other young people to pay rent. There's a lot of things that weren't sitting well for me. And then, 2020 pandemic happened. So there seemed to be a lot of reasons to not go to art school and just let go of this dream of the painter future for me.
Hi.
Oh. Has this been playing the whole time? I hope so. Good. Of course, I've learned a lot since I've arrived here because that's what we came here to do. I have found some kind of, direction in this habit that I can't kick, so to speak. During the first year of our grad program, and a few people have already mentioned this, it was, pandemic times and we were remote. So I got really close to my journaling practice, and that's something I've done since I was, 7, a really important way of reflecting for me. But it took on this new weight under the lens of grad school, under the lens of the pandemic. So my sister had lost housing, moved in with my partner and I in our technically one-bedroom apartment. Things were feeling close, things were feeling tight, and the journaling practice allowed me to stay grounded in my present, and at a time when it was pretty easy to disassociate. The other thing that the journaling practice did for me was I gained a respect and gratitude for the physical object. So there's something about having the object that I could hold in a moment when we were really relying on digital media to communicate. And then journals are continue to be kind of the first step in making it work for me. So most things are kind of built off of these things that start as journal drawings. My generation of transient, displaced, and housing insecure folks are one of the last to not have digitized records of our past. So as we know, social media and cell phones that were also cameras and like plugged into the social media space were not a thing when we were growing up. And voice memos, like emails. I'm sure emails were a thing for part of it, but it wasn't like part of our day-to-day. And so our record of our archive, so to speak, was material-based. It was the letters, it was the family photos, it was, those physical objects you collected, like the spoons from the States or school papers, Christmas ornaments. These were all things that kind of like didn't follow me from place to place. So we moved to a new place and we would lose a lot of this, if not all of it. Ironically, it took me a couple moves and a couple of like unwrapping paintings and having them fall apart to realize that I was kind of reliving this past of transience and like nostalgia and losing my shit by coming to grad school. So for those of us who travel to come to MFAS, like we are packing up our artwork and like maybe shipping it, maybe asking friends for favor, maybe burdening our partners, maybe crashing at people's houses last minute. And with all this like massive, for me at least, shit. And it's like falling apart because I didn't research the materials and I'm triaging what can make it, like what can fit in the box, what can fit in the car, what can fit in the mail, and maybe tossing it because it might be too hard to move around. And there's kind of a randomness in what makes it. It seems to be the things that like are really important never make it, but the things that were like mundane and dumb are always around. And it was just mirroring this narrative of housing insecurity. At first, it was, it was like bringing up a lot of grief for me, especially when these like objects I worked on all summer long kind of crumbled onto my floor. But then there's kind of like, I don't know, something poetic about it. So on this screen right here, we have on the left this picture of me leaving a residency program at the Vermont Studio Center last fall. Oh, on the right, I meant to say. And you can see that's our guest room or whatever that kind of room is, just filled with my trash bags of stuff. On the left is an excellent illustration of how my work looks when I have moved it from Baltimore. So it's kind of just in a trash bag. And that canvas is not, that's something where I was working in that two-season porch. And so you can get a sense of my, the last thing I wanted to point out is that this picture in the background is my first, the studio wall of my first studio in Baltimore. And you can kind of get a sense from it, my early interest in material ethnography, so to speak. So the way that materials and objects, help us define ourselves in relation to place. The assemblage of fragmented memories and materials form an imperfect narrative of my home experience, at times close and specific, familiar, just as often disrupted, abstracted, and falling apart. Through learning how to integrate these objects into my figurative work, I found I was trying to kind of depict my experience of home. So home now, home in the past. But I was really struggling to pin it down to like this one image, just one feeling or memory. So these two pictures are, I think, from after my first summer of being here in Baltimore, which means my second summer of MFAS. And you can see there's a bath mat, there's like mop strings, there's a hair tie, there's a mirror. So the household objects are making it through. And then the other thing is that because I'm always drawing first from the first person perspective, there's a little bit of like a skewed perspective happening in the drawings, because I kind of start drawing from here, and then I take all my source material and kind of reconstruct the figure, and the figure's looking at us, or like maybe the object that they're infatuated with in the scene. My paintings are reconstructed depictions of the leaking container of home. They are and reconstructed. They are recalibrated, conjoined, and installed in ways that are not consistent. There's always something kind of unfinished about them. As Catherine Haggerty said, who I've had the privilege of working with this past year at the New York Crit Club, the paintings upend themselves. And certainly they have upended me, as I learned only after making them what materials are going to last my many frantic packing methods. And so they reflect my personal experience of housing insecurity in many ways. This painting, some of you may remember, is from our second and third year show last year. They're painting on canvas, and there's accompanied found objects, including found fabric, digital embroidery, astroturf, I think a rug I painted on, and one inflatable dolphin. This is another still from that scene. But then, in one damning thesis committee meeting, where I shared my half-baked work from the summer and prattled on about housing insecurity for however long I did that for, I was kind of hit with this truth, where I had to reckon with the fact that home and housing was not legible to my audience. So I was being asked, how is this about home? Like, where is the house? Where are the windows or the door or the roof? Like, where is the home in this? It was a lot. So my practice was shook, as all good grad programs will do to you, right? And that's what we came here for. It just feels very uncomfortable when it's you. And so I returned that fall to my housing advocacy work, wondering how I was going to compartmentalize the work that I was doing with most of my week from my painting practice. And so these images here depict some of the community projects I did before coming to grad school as an affordable housing advocate. And these are all stills from a project I did called Voices of Home, where I interviewed residents in affordable housing, and then I did these painted portraits or community painting installations, however we call them, and we paired the audio interviews with the paintings that we did together. But just to say that you can see kind of early on there's this cross-contamination between my art practice and my advocacy work. This is just me being like, who am I? So then a strange thing happened. One of my charges as a housing advocate is trying to figure out how to get housing education to the people who need it in ways that they can receive it. And one ways I do that is by working with, there's a community garden network in Vermont that works with a lot of the same affordable housing sites that I work with and advocate for and alongside. And I was working on site for this, doing community garden stuff, which I'm not actually good at, but can show up and do. And then I introduced myself to these residents who are maybe meeting for the first time, like, hey, I'm here to do fair housing education. And what happens almost every time, inevitably, because I am going there to let people know about fair housing, knowing that's education that a lot of folks don't have access to. So what happens is they're like, hey, I'll tell you what's fair. And what they're saying is fair, like the way that they understand fair. This is fair versus this is not fair. I'm saying fair, capital F, Fair Housing Act. And there's always this kind of moment where I'm like, oh, this yes, tell me the thing that's happening. Let's talk about this and unpack what's happening there. And then I'll also, through this conversation, tell you about the Fair Housing Act and your rights under fair housing. And so this particular issue was a problem that comes up almost all the time in communities I work with. There's a top-down decision. The property manager made a decision about the community garden that impacted the residents. And there's a sense of fear and anxiety around them accessing their food that they're growing in their community garden. And so I kind of often highlight, in this case too, highlight to my housing provider peers, like, hey, like they're, when we make decisions like this, it kind of eliminates choice in the way people use shared spaces, and it's an equity issue. And I kind of get pushed back from the housing providers, like, we are providing them housing. Like, they could choose not to live here. They could choose to live somewhere else. What I know, and a lot of people know, and I'm sure many of you know, is that if you are a person that needs subsidized housing, like cannot afford through your income, whatever way that you're paying your rent or your housing, you're waiting on a list for a long time to get that housing, and once you're in it, it's really hard to move without risking something that you need to live your life, like a basic need. Yeah, so this is like a preoccupation maybe with the housing structure itself. I was then faced with, sorry. I'm like, these are two different. So here I just presented two different kind of stories. There's one, the thesis committee meeting, where's the house here? There's this other like, hey, like we provide housing, that is home, they can choose where they live, they cannot be there if it's a problem. So these are two examples of mistranslations of the word home. And for me, it's really based in this preoccupation with the housing structure as equating to home. So like, where's the door, where's the roof? Versus like, we provide them a roof, right? And so like, I'm like dealing with these, like, my head's kind of spinning, right? And like, I went to grad school, like, oh, my work's not about home. I'm like trying to talk to housing providers, like we are providing home, like don't challenge us. Another thing that I do through my work is that we disseminate these art kits in April. That's when the Fair Housing Act was passed. And in the art kits are these prompts to encourage folks participating to think about home and housing equity through these like kind of creative activities. And then we stuff a bunch of like fair housing education materials in the art kits. And we get all of these responses back. And like, this is my performative element. I'm like very nervous about this. Does this work? All right. So we get all these responses back, and they're pretty simple drawings usually. I think you can kind of imagine what they look like. I have not done this part before. Ooh, you see that? We got a square and a triangle. And I think we all know this shape. This is our icon, right? This equals home. We all know it. And we get that a lot. The irony is that most of the people I work with do not live in homes that look like that. So in the housing world, we call that the single family home. And most of the people that I work with actually live in congregate housing. That means housing that maybe shares the same entrance. I'm sure a lot of our city folks are familiar with that. It does exist in Vermont, despite us being a small state, and it's a really important source of affordable housing. Or mobile homes. Mobile home parks are a really important part of our affordable housing landscape. But just to say, like, we're getting all these, quote, single-family home depictions, and it's not actually depicting where people live. Similarly, if you Google, like, house in Vermont, it's going to look something like this. I know that because this image is from Google. And this image tells us a lot. It tells us, like, a lot about who lives there, for instance. It's a pretty packed narrative, And I can tell you that as a person living in Vermont in a house, my house does not look like that, right? Like, I'm sure many of us don't live in houses that look like that. Many of us couldn't, even if we wanted to. Many of us don't want to. And then we got these like really magical submissions from a library in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. We got like 50s of these, and these are 3rd and 4th graders. So we get these depictions of like this unicorn window or unicorn poster maybe. We got the like bunk beds or the person that maybe lives underneath the bed. We got the cat on the refrigerator. This is home for these students. The home for them is this like pattern on the floor. It's the weird spaceship that almost definitely doesn't exist, but who's to say? It's the tent underneath the moon, right? Like, we got like 50 of these. So what it took was just someone like sitting with these students and unpacking this word. There's not a single, quote, single family home in any of the 50 submissions. No one drew the box for the triangle. For these students, home was the people that you share space with. It was the animals maybe that you shared space with. It was the objects you shared space with. The things that made their homes unique to them were also the things that signified rest, belonging, safety, personal agency. And for me, home still exists like in this house that I had growing up in Vermont before we first lost housing. Linda Berry's a graphic novelist who I love, and everyone should look up if you don't already know her. But she said, images are found by, in, and through action between the inside and the outside. So that's a theme, right? So for Linda Berry, images are a product of memory, experiences, and imagination. Reliance on the viewer's expectation of an image invites a translation that's based on their experiences, their histories, the landscapes that they live in, their personal memories. And so our understanding of language is based on image, is based on our memories. Home is not a static place, nor a universal concept. It's relational, it's based in memory and the personal. And so then our translation of the word home is based on our understanding of the word. It's relational, it's kind of in vibration. There's a push-pull there. So similarly, home may not stay resolute to a brick and mortar place. I can't tell you how many people I interviewed for the project Voices of Home who did not describe the place that they were living in as home. It was often a place based in their memory. For people who are transient, chronically displaced, or not afforded privacy in their home space, privacy for rest, or personal agency in their home space, so the ability to enact change so that their home meets their needs. For those kind of folks, like home might not be a physical structure at all, or certainly may not be a place that they live in the present, may being the operative word. I had the privilege of hearing from a lecture from art historian Chris Rack, and they said something that's really stuck with me. They described painting as the act of staging meaning and action between body and the thing that everyone's compressing into that painting, right? So the images are always moving themselves in relation to each other and other things, because we as viewers are always reacting to them. We're always forming relationships differently and newly in our minds. For me, the object thing that Chris Rack is describing and that I'm exploring in my work, home, is not a place that exists in the present, is not fixed in time, and may not even have a digital record to prove its occurrence. So home is a transient idea. It's comprised of our ever-changing present, our memories of home past, and our dynamic relationship between people, places, and things. The more we broaden our context of a symbol, that what precedes it, what follows it, what overlays, what contains it, who's witness to it, and what histories they bring what experiences they bring in their translation of it, the more the symbol is imbued with ambiguity and the wider range of translations we're giving. So maybe just a single word home is inadequate to describe this really complex and critical need that people have. Fortunately, visual art gives us a lot of clues on how we can imbue a sense of ambiguity in a symbol. So we can use sequence, overlays, abstraction, disruption, elimination, just to name a few. I mean, that's what we're doing here, right? And painting can teach us a lot about how to nuance language. This is my example of overlays. That's a painting on the right has an image transfer of text from a journal. On the left is that recurring shower curtain piece that I'll be returning to again. Here's my illustration of context. So on the left is an image that you can see currently in my thesis show. The base is a toy, like where it's the string game, you throw strings at a toy. I'm not quite sure, I didn't play it, but it was a dump find that serves as a great painting base. On the right is a painting called The Hole Doesn't Have to Be Empty, and I painted that, I want to say last summer, or maybe the summer before, and now lives in my house, as you can see. So the context in this example, or these examples, really changed the way I experience these paintings, maybe the way you experience these paintings. And for me, the context actually is the context of their intended spaces that I'm responding to. The home space in one case, certain parts of my public space in another case, are really important to the work. So as a painter, nuancing an image is exciting and perhaps a big part of what we do as painters. As an advocate and an artist, however, I am charged with the responsibility of as a communicator. And it's important to enunciate, to communicate clearly, especially when we're talking about rights and housing. And language relies on boundaries. It relies on lines in the sand, confines, the binary maybe, what it's like maybe we translate based off of what it's not. And the closer I approach to communicating in a clear way, in a way that's succinct, the less honest and real it seems. So I'm definitely challenged by my role as an outreach advocate. These pieces that call back to that shower curtain piece, the one that I showed in the beginning, they're currently in my thesis show. And I was thinking about the way that this ramp kind of forced viewers through the work. And the depiction is of a private, intimate bath scene. And of course, I'm thinking about the tension between privacy in the home space and how some people have more access to that than others. Privacy, if you don't have privacy, if you have to share parts of your home space or all of your home space, it just means that those messy parts of your life might be more visible or exposed. And then to further complicate this idea of home, many of us perform some of our home or day-to-day activities in the public space. For instance, if you don't have a personal laundromat, you're going to be doing your laundry in a public space. These are from a series I'm working on right now that I started this past spring called Longing is Just Our Word for Knowing. And working in these kind of extensions of the home space. My friend Rachel Jones, who's an art writer in LA, she described these sites as leaky third places, which I really obviously like and has stuck with me. So in making these works, I thought I had, maybe I'll go to this one for a second. In making these works, I am thinking about that leaky third space. I'm drawing people in the space, and I actually thought when I started the project that people were going to be coming up to me and asking me about what I was doing, And I would then tell them about my housing advocacy and connect them to resources, which I should have known was not what people would do as a person that used to use a laundromat and definitely didn't want to like chat people up. Because a laundromat, it's like, that's your home. Like if you're doing your laundry, you're like doing your home thing. You're not presenting yourself to the public. You're not performing, so to speak. This brought me to the concept of bioregionalism, which was introduced to me through Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing. And it's a concept that's born of the 70s or the west coast of the US, and I'm not going to get into the whole like thing, but the way Jenny Odell described it that stuck with me was as having to do with an awareness not just of the many life forms of each place, but how they're interrelated, including humans. She says, bioregionalism asks us to identify as citizens of the bioregion as much as, if not more than, the state. Our citizenship as in a bioregion means not only a familiarity with the local ecology, but commitment to stewarding it together. And of course, to steward the land together, you have to have stability enough to be able to build a connection with the land. Also, you have to be able to be invited to have an impact. The paintings in this series are made from plaster, found objects, pictures of the space. There are currently, some are displayed in my thesis show up currently. And here's just some stills from a public project I did right before coming here. It's a mural I helped design with a group of high schoolers, and they interviewed the people using the community space where we did the mural to see what they wanted to see in it. This is just like a celebratory meal that we had together after. And then here's a mosaic I did last fall. And then for this mosaic, we invited the community members that I had worked with in the past that were living at affordable housing sites nearby to contribute objects to embed right into the mosaic. And for me, the important thing about this piece is this moment of connecting people, not just to this landscape that they're sharing, but inviting them to like really notice like the things that are happening naturally in their space that are already there, and to really see that impact that they have on the space. So there's something kind of powerful in inviting someone to have an imprint, to like see the cause and effect, to know that they are stewards of this space in community with their neighbors. And the work teaches me that a lot of how we can change the way we can do our work as housing advocates, to like integrate these ideas of play and connection and agency in space, instead of just referring to our work in terms of units and like the physical things that we're building. I'm told that this kind of like overlap, because what's happening is that I'm learning in doing this work and in being here that this whole like guilt around like, oh, I left housing advocacy to be an artist. There's actually like, there's not such a distinction in that I'm actually becoming, in some ways, a better advocate by learning new ways of talking about the work that we do. Perhaps more of a social practice. So I'm finding renewed purpose in my work, even with that friction of being here doing this instead of being there advocating for my community. I just really like how this scene kind of grounds us into place. And then, of course, you should go to the Fox building, check out our thesis work. I struggled a lot with this feeling of like, how do I bring the space that these works were responding to into the gallery space? And I might always be struggling with that, the way that the white walls kind of hold their own space. And I wanted to do that in a way that like called back to the laundromat without pretending that I was like recreating it, because of course you can't bring that space into a gallery. but you can, sing its song, so to speak. This is just like a funny, also from my thesis show, and a lot of the works in my thesis show now are reworked old works that fell apart and were really hard to unpack and somehow came out much stronger than they ever were. And then the objects I included are kind of like from my dorm room when I was like, ooh, this is large and industrial and uncomfortable. This piece is resin, found materials. It's called, I think, Portrait from Behind the Community Center. There's a comb and a shoe. There's a bag of shoes left behind our community center, just, like a 3-minute walk from my house last spring that were really gross. And I was low-key discouraged from bringing them home, but we did it nonetheless, and it worked out great. And then you can see this piece has come a long way from when I started it back home. This actually may not be the same piece, I'm still unsure. But mostly I wanted to just illustrate the ways that these pieces feel different in the home space and the ways I'm trying to bring back just a little nod to those locations while not trying to erase the fact that it's in a white gallery. And then I do think it's important to note, as I close out this conversation, that coming here this past summer, our state kind of made this decision to not fund a program that housed 3,000 people. And it's notably a Democratic supermajority, so there's always this kind of narrative of the conservatives, they don't get, not to get political here, but oftentimes, it's just as often folks that are in these more radical or more liberal spaces that just don't understand how the deep history of our housing inequities, or maybe choose not to understand, is probably more accurate. And then I'm leaving on a picture of my house because I think it's just, there's something kind of amazing in this program, and that it is a summer program and it allows a lot of people to participate who might not otherwise. And we bought our first home since, I knew this would happen. I never had a weird emotional, not weird, but it's of course when I present I get emotional about it, but we couldn't have done it if we were forced to kind of relocate for my program, so. And that's it. Ooh. Nice. All right. Q&A. Wow, could you guys hear me that whole time? Okay, good. That would be hilarious if not. Do we have any questions? Should I do the mic thing for the question part? Hello? Oh, Anike. And already?
No, I don't even have a question. First, you look great. I just want to congratulate you and say that you've always been doing the hard work. Like I said, this is not a question, it's just a statement. Your advocacy work is not bound by just finding housing. You have advocated for many of us through this program, and I just want to say thank you. I love how your work overlaps along with your narrative. It's very powerful, it is rich, and I'm so proud of you. And I okay, right, no, none of that. And I think that it is a beautiful marriage between, because we've talked about this before, and trying to bring your advocacy and your willingness to say what you don't know, what you want to know, and you just did a beautiful job of putting it all together, and I thank you, and yay for you and the performative, and also, God, I will say you are the one person that I do know that brought so many things with her and was so powerful in doing so. In terms of your work, like you, So I think you are your work lives in you, and vice versa. And thank you so much for presenting today and just being the person that you are. It's really very much appreciated. You write great emails also.
Thank you, Anike. Do we have another question from the audience? I'm just kidding.
Well, thanks. Okay, I'm not sure you said this. I think so. I was like, this is so great. Towards maybe 2/3 in or 3/4 in, you said we need in housing advocacy new words to talk about what a home is, and that's kind of what your whole lecture was leading to. Ways that are more playful, that are taken into account agency. I don't know if I remember you said agency and playfulness. I don't remember if you said safety, comfort, warmth, but in the same realm of these words. And it occurred to me that, your lectures showed me that that's part of what art can do. And can you just develop that a little more? And is it accurate? Did I understand? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, that's the thing that I learned in being here was that housing advocacy is pretty dry work. It's a lot of the same people. So when I first started the work, it was all old white dudes, and it was the same ilk of the Bernie Sanders era. They were all buds or something, It was super weird. I was maybe 30 years more, maybe younger than everyone else. And it's slowly changing, but it continues to be this thing, and this is a whole can of worms where we talk about the work in a way that doesn't invite people in and doesn't do anything new. So we're actually just maintaining the same harmful structures that have created inequity to begin with. I'll just say that for me, this there's different kind of ways that art can open that up, and the more literal way was the public art thing, where it's inviting people to have an impact. This is your space, this is where you live, we can decide what this looks like, we can decide how we want to tell our story together. It's pretty literal in that way. But if we think about that community garden example that I gave, where they're they just want a fence. I think that was the problem. They just wanted a fence around their garden. And there's so many structures to tell them, no, you can't have that. And if you are a homeowner with a yard, nobody tells you, well, maybe you have zoning rules around the color you paint your house, which is another kind of problematic thread, but you can paint your walls in your house without repercussions, because it's your house, right? And it's just, if for folks that lived in this shared spaces, that might not be a choice that they even get. So that's a really literal read. And then there's this more complicated thing. I kind of was talking about language and translation. And when I say language, I am saying words, but I'm also saying images. And there's a way that painting is kind of naturally more nuanced, unless you're very photorealistic, or maybe even then it's maybe more that's a whole can of worms. But you know what I'm saying? If a very abstracted painting, for instance, has a really wide read, perhaps, it is relying on you to bring more to it. Whereas something that might be semi-legible, we can choose as artists what's legible, and there's still opportunity for the viewer to translate. Does that answer your question? Yeah, it is this is a problem I'll maybe always be grappling with. Thank you. Do we have more? Oh, Nadia.
It's funny, I have comments, but I'm trying to no, I want to ask a
question. So I will start with a question, and then I have a few comments for you, okay? Any interest in doing a book? Yes. Maybe. No, I mean, I do think, I think your presentation and I think the thesis show has done a really excellent job of seeing that you have found a very comfortable place for all these ideas, the language, the objects, the painting, the installation, to come together. And it feels like you're very comfortable with it. In a way that I think, you talked about that one crit last summer or whatever, like there were some struggles, but it was all you, do you know what I'm saying? It's interesting. You found like this kind of like, oh, you kind of figured it all out. It came together for you. And I do think that there's something that you're doing really well with how you are talking about these different areas of your life, but they're all coming together as one. And so to me, I'm like, oh, you want a means of getting it out to a lot of people, but you also want the art involved, and I'm like, the art and language, there does seem to be a natural kind of progression towards making some kind of book. That an artist book, but not like a unique artist book, but in the sense that it's just one, a publication, artist book. I mean, sure, yes. I mean, there can be things that fold out of it too. I mean, it could be, an interesting take. I just mean it's not a single one book that you have to go put gloves on to go see, but it gets out to a large group of people. Now, just for a couple comments, I love the fact that you are working with the installation too, and even presenting today's presentation for the group as, even this performative moment of bringing things on, all of those objects that are definitely represent home or connect home, for you, for us. And I so encourage you to just keep going with that. And we've talked about the laundromat, thinking also ways to present the work that is more expansive than just a traditional gallery format, and also ways to continue thinking about painting that goes beyond just the traditional materials of paint and flat, backgrounds. Congratulations.
So you started on the canvas, correct? Yes. So when was the moment when you discovered that you needed to use another material to get like this painting and this message through? And then how do you find this material? How do you go about collecting it? Where does it come from? What's the story?
Is this on? Hello? Nice. I didn't mean to talk about source of material. You will notice there's trash cans and trash bags are like a funny theme in my work, both because of the amount of times that I've had to fish my art from garbage, for better or for worse, but also because a lot of the material is things that are left by the curbs, like outside of dumpsters, inside of dumpsters, friends taking it out of dumpsters and then giving it to me. So like a lot of it is just discarded materials. But in terms of your question of like when did I start incorporating materials, like, painting's messy and thick and sticky, and especially the way I paint, it's already kind of lends itself to this like 3D format. And it's kind of a long story, but the short is that I like leading into grad school and trying to be like, I want to do this. I started making them flatter and more designy, and I like kind of lost my voice in it. And I was already using collage because of this like kleptic, like I needed the material record of my past and I want the real thing in the thing. And then I came here, and as you may or may not know, we are interdisciplinary, and I entered into the program, and like we've got a lot of ways of making here. So people were like, all right, painting. Okay, we know about this. Like, come on, let's do something more creative here. But I had already brought all this like extra stuff with me. And so originally I started painting on the object directly as if it was a canvas. And everyone was like, all right, not very creative. You can just paint on a canvas then. Like, what are you doing? And it took me a long time to figure out like, oh, the object has its own like pattern and texture and way of like being a part of the work that I need to like pay attention to and listen. And some of that was like the object rejecting my paint altogether, like the paint just coming off. This is like a really long, I think we should do a studio visit is where I'm going. More to come. Do we have more questions? Jackie, did you still wanna?
You kind of started to get into it, actually, with this idea of the materials, or your journey of using materials, or the painting on the object, or thinking about the object as another pattern that could be used as a painting, or and I just want to say, okay, first of all, I'm a big fan. And I think that your fearlessness with the materials and putting together, all of this disparate like imagery. I mean, just looking at that too. I mean, you have a fearlessness about you when you go into the studio that I really admire. And anyway, I'm not gonna cry, and you're not gonna cry, because no one is crying tonight. But even this, it's off to the side in your presentation. It's so strong, and I think that I agree with Nadia. The like pushing this more. I mean, the introduction. This is new to me, of video. I mean, that's.
I saw a little last summer, and it was good.
Just anyway. So congratulations. I don't really have a question.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm definitely not afraid. I can tell, I mean, I am afraid, it's wet, I'm not fearless. I can tell that we're over. I'm smelling like the sweat off my body. And Howard says we're at time. So everyone, please have more questions and come find me later. Thank you.